Good morning, my colleagues. We have returned from recess. We are on page 117, section 9. Do we have any question for section 9? There being centuries, I didn't see any amendments for section 9. Does anybody have anything for 9? We are now on section 10. We're on page 118. Advance payment of medical service. My colleagues, I've looked at the stack of amendments I have here. I think most of you are not into page 123 and on.
131.
And when we get to those pages, Madam Speaker, do you want to speak?
Yes, I want to share with you, Mr. Chair, I know we're still on chapter 12, right? And I just want to share with you that I have an amendment that I'm proffering right now, and it literally is on page 131, and it's regarding the restrictions on hiring of unclassified employees. I realized that the provisions were in the previous budget, but it's not on this, and I just want, for semantics, want to make sure that it's included.
All right.
And it's passed out, and
Well,
so,
Madam Speaker, when we get to page 131, I'll address you. But as we're moving along, we just go through everybody else.
only because it's just an amendment, Mr. Chair, that incorporates the restrictions of hiring of unclassified employees and the exceptions. So I was hoping that if notwithstanding, that we at least just accept this one because it was not reported. So if I can have fair consideration on this notwithstanding to include this at this time. We're on the same section,
Okay,
on the same chapter.
Yes, I understand. I'm just looking for it right now on the stack of.
Sergeant of Arms, this should have been passed out last night. Page 131, can you check it right now? Yes.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Are we moving forward to page 131 now?
I beg your pardon?
Are we moving forward to page 131 now?
Well, we're on page 118 right now, and I'm looking at the stack we have. We have some amendment for page 123. We have quite a few. Unless the body, I'm just trying to avoid
yes.
jumping around.
I do know we did on the previous chapters, you opened the opportunity up to talk about the chapter in general.
Right.
And the reason why I want to do that, because there may be one or two amendments that may be a part of this,
Oh,
right?
okay.
A follow-up. So I'm just wanting to know, because it was in the previous budget, I want to make sure that it's there, and it's about the restrictions of hiring unclassified employees unless otherwise authorized by this chapter. So I'm asking
Notwithstanding.
just to go to add section 31 on chapter 12.
Okay, on page 131, I have 1, 2.
There are several less.
We're not moving to that right now. I just wanted to explain it to all the colleagues,
Okay.
what we all have on our tables, so we
Right.
all understand. And if there's no objection, we can go to 131, but I prefer not to. I prefer we just go down the sequence. But Madam Speaker, when we get to 131, you will be addressed before anybody else, okay? Because you raised that point.
Yes,
Not
Mr.
unless you see from page 118 to 131, something may conflict.
Yes.
When it does conflict, we'll be reminded that, because I don't see, unless any of our colleagues here and yourself sees anything that deals with unclassified employees, as we move along, if you all just take a quick glance of it, nothing here identifies unclassified employees. There's even some sections on like page 124, we need to remind everybody, we need a strike that was addressed by the vice speaker in reference to the chief of police, the deputy chief, and the deputy for customs. We need to strike that from the budget bill, so I want to make sure I address your concerns as first.
Just want to
when
know,
when we
Mr.
get-
Chair, and if, I'll take your lead on that, sir.
Okay?
Thank you.
We're on page 118.
So don't tell them to reprint it.
Page 118. Okay? So, if,
But we are still on chapter 12, sir.
oh yes, we're still in chapter 12, but when we get to 131, you'll be the first to be addressed, because you brought that concern. And I know that my colleagues would like to just stay in the sequence, because
Okay,
we're at
no
the
worries.
tail end of this budget bill. All right, does anyone have any questions for section 10? None? We're in section 10? Are there any questions for there being none? Ma'am? Yes, ma'am. We're still on 118, yes. Any questions for section 11, transfer of employees? Because I remind our colleagues, most of the amendments are it's a few more pages before this, unless you
No
have
objection.
questions. Okay, we are now on section 13.
No,
Competitive Wage Act, employees amend, none. Section 13, board and commission stipends. None, ma'am, yes, ma'am, no, I'm looking,
They are trying to pass out an amendment for that.
for that, okay,
Yeah,
for
it's just
section
to add
13.
another sentence to allow the parole board, notwithstanding any other law, to receive $50 stipend also.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
On the boards,
Yeah,
and to
it's-
add a sentence to that board.
And that's to add basically the parole board, right?
Correct.
Great. Are there, if we can bookmark that one specifically? Okay, section 13, so as soon as it does come out, okay? Section 14, are there any questions on section 14, contracts? None. We are now on section 15, program reporting requirements. Anyone, I don't see any amendments on the table. That's closed. We're on section 16. There being none. Yes, Senator Clinton. Nope. Closed. We are on section 17. This as a CRER. You have a possible amendment? No, none? No, Madam Vice, anything? None? That's closed. We are now on section 18, temporary employment retired attorneys. 123, Senator Therese, if I'm correct, I think you and several others have something for page 123. We'll just give a few seconds, unless you're already on section 18, that's correct, on page 123. If I'm correct, you have an amendment. Senator Therese does have an amendment, 123. It's something to, I think it's to add the unified court, the temporary employment of retired attorneys. It's to add one sentence. We're good, Senator Therese? Okay, does everybody have a copy of the amendment? On 123 on the section 18, temporary employment of retired attorneys. It's to include the judiciary and the public defenders. Ma'am? Please? On
Thank you, Mr.
section
Chair.
18?
Yes, so this is just, this is a section that allows the Office of the Attorney General to hire retired attorneys, but I'm adding an amendment to extend this to the judiciary and the public defender and the alternate public defenders, so they can also do the same.
Are there any objections to that amendment? Motion passes. Are there anything else for section 18? Yes, you still for section 18?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't see it passed out yet, but to delete that sentence that says, "Any attorney hired under this section shall only be eligible to enroll in the Government of Guam Health Insurance Program as an active employee."
It's the same, it's similar to.
Correct.
Are there any objection to that? My colleagues, I'd ask that if we come into anything that's similar to what we've already passed, that we able to just agree to it, unless you have an objection.
Mr. Chair, on the motion again, just to reiterate it, to allow legal, if we, for some odd reason, bypass it, to make the technical corrections as it
Yes.
sits throughout the bill.
Yes, thank you.
On that so take it as a motion.
On that motion, no objection. All right, we are now on page 124, payments of civil service settlements. Are there any objection? None. Section 20, appointment of reminder. That was all deleted, so as we all, yes,
Mr. Chair,
Senator Lee?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I believe this amendment to page 120, section 13,
120?
Senator Terlahi's amendment has been passed out, so maybe we can go back to that.
All right, and that's with the, the parole board. Right, okay, so what, could we bookmark that? Page 120? We go back, and that is to include the, as she mentioned earlier, the compensation of the parole board, members to get $50. Are there any objection to that amendment? Okay, we bookmarked page 120. It was an amendment that she proffered, and it was just getting around.
Can I just get a quick recess, Mr. Chair, to discuss the dollar amount with the
50
sponsor?
Okay, all right, let's take a quick recess so they can discuss the dollar amount. We have returned from recess. We're back from recess. My colleagues, we have an amendment, or actually withdrawal of an amendment. Senator Therese?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'll withdraw my amendment.
Yes. Thank you. Any objection? None? Senator Therese, I know you have now a new amendment. Or, Vice Speaker? You're both on the title, so. She said,
Okay.
you, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is to clear up some of the confusion with how it's going to be calculated, and we increased it to, notwithstanding any other provision of law, each member of the Guam Parole Board shall be compensated $250 for every meeting the member attends. No member shall be compensated over $1,000 per month, irrespective of the number of meetings that a member attends in any given month.
Are there any objections, or is there any member who would like to speak to that amendment? There being none, is there any objection? Motion passes. We will now proceed back to page 124, and we have an amendment on 124, because when we were at 124, I did discuss on 124 the issues of the deputy chief, but we do have an amendment from Senator Torres on section 19. Ma'am?
Mr. Chair, I do have an amendment for page 123.
We already passed that, ma'am?
If I can make an emotion.
We already passed 123. We already passed that on the retired attorneys. We're now in 124.
If I can make the motion to reconsider.
You want a motion to reconsider? Do we have yeah, I mean,
It, actually, the numbering is incorrect. It says page 133, but it's 123. It's for the portion, for section 17, Consolidated Revenue and Expenditures Reporting. It's been passed out, I believe. It says 133, but it's 123. Yeah.
My colleagues, we're back from recess. There is a motion to go back. We're on page 124, to go one page back to make an amendment. Do I have any objection on going back? No objection, okay. Just remind yourself. We are now on page 123. Hopefully it doesn't become a practice. We're on page 123. Senator Sabina.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have an amendment which reads, basically adds expenditures to the CRER report. So it reads to amend sections A, B, and D of section 17 of chapter 12 of the bill to read,
Does this,
A, comparison of revenues and expenditures for the preceding month contrasted with the same month for the prior fiscal year. B, comparison of year-to-date revenues and expenditures for the preceding month contrasted with the same period for the prior fiscal year. And then D, comparison of quarterly adopted revenues allocated for the preceding quarter and the estimated quarterly expenditures contrasted with actual quarterly revenues collected and the actual expenditures incurred. So I did ask Director Byrne if this is can be accomplished, and so maybe I'll just ask the question to Mr. Byrne for the body. So, can this be achieved? Is this feasible as far as
I have it somewhere.
including expenditures in the CRER report? And what time is needed for this to be accomplished? Or what type of lag?
Senator, thank you. This is actually an amendment to the CRER. I've talked, which is a joint production between BBMR and DOA. I've talked to my colleagues at BBMR, and we're content that A and B can be done. We're a bit concerned about D because it uses the word estimate, and apart from the time it would take to program this particular report, which we don't have at the moment, I think we have an issue with using the estimated expenditure, which might be difficult to achieve, especially for things such as debt repayments, where we pay the interest every month, but the principal only occasionally. So we're concerned about that kind of complication in the whole thing.
Okay, so how about the actual expenditures? Is that more achievable? So if I deleted out estimated quarterly?
Yeah, actual expenditures are in the CRER now.
Okay. So it's not feasible to do the estimated quarterly? That seems to be like, is that what you're saying? It's not?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult.
Okay. But so if I delete that out and kept the actual expenditures occurred, that's achievable then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actual expenditures can be ascertained. Yes.
Okay, so then what I'll do is I'll just amend that amendment to take out estimated quarterly expenditures, but leave everything in place? I'm sorry, maybe I should ask.
Yeah,
Lester.
if you look at the latest CRER, you'll see that we already have that information. So if therein lies some of our concerns. We'll gladly do A and B, but the information for D is already there. You want to see it? We'll do A and B. But
Okay.
again, the estimated quarterly expenditures, as Mr. Burns said, you're going to be seeing lag times with people that are going to be getting into contracts, encumbering funds, and then there's just no rhyme and reason. So on when somebody actually goes ahead and moves forward with their requisition to GSA, when that requisition actually gets turned into a purchase order, and when expenditures on that purchase order actually occur. Everything has a very different time frame of its own. So you'll see already what it is that's been encumbered and expended, and you just kind of like take the time to read it, and then I think you'll get a better idea of where we are. But we'll do A and B for you.
So, but with D, so what I'm saying is that we took out the estimated quarterly expenditures, but kept the actual expenditures occurred.
Yeah.
That's-
Again, this page right here shows you what it is that's already, I think you already got the information.
Okay. It's already reported. Okay. So, okay. So then I'll just take out D then.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Senator Sabina, you've introduced your amendment, and you're amending your amendment, correct?
That's correct, based on the
Okay,
testimony.
if you can please state it, what is your amendment to your amendment?
So my amendment is to delete the D part of the original amendment. So it's just going to read A and B only.
Are there any objections to the amendment? None. Are there any Senator Therese?
Yes. On the amendment. Yeah, just wanted to ask DOA if there's a report that shows prior year obligations or non-appropriated obligations. Because I know these are like expenditures versus appropriation, right?
Senator, I'm not quite sure what you're asking, but there's a schedule of continuing appropriations
Continuing,
in
okay.
the audited statements.
In the audited statement, continuing
sir.
obligations. Okay,
Yes.
so are there any other obligations that come up during the year that are not appropriated for? For example, you keep a list of those as they come up?
Yes.
Are they reported anywhere that we can also keep track of it?
Yes, you can, but, and they, when, at the end of the year in the audited statements, there's a schedule of budgeted expenses compared with actual expenses, and they come out in a section where there's no budget for them.
Right. So that's at the end of the year, but I'm asking,
Yes.
is there a report that would show that anything new for fiscal year 2019, for example, not audited yet? Can we keep tabs of that? What those obligations are that you are,
Yes, I mean, we obviously do in order to be able to report
Right.
at the end of the year, but we don't have I think we don't have a requirement or a schedule to report that at the moment.
all right, then,
The other thing too, ma'am, is when you have a prior year obligation and there's a passage of time, you certainly don't want to, recognize a prior year obligation and get the clock started again.
pardon?
You don't want to recognize something that was already time barred and therefore restart the clock.
Well, what does the audit do? I'm only
No, it's
asking
just a
those that,
report.
so you end up with a end of the year audit, and then there are other things that might get paid during 2019 that you are, considering obligations. So I'm just wondering, is there a way for the legislature to keep track of those during the fiscal year, not to go back prior to 2018, but the new ones that you're adding on after the audits?
If I could just repeat what Mr. Carlson said, because it's a really important point. We don't want to recognize a prior obligation which is time barred by retolling it.
Right?
So that's something we certainly don't want to have in there, because we'd end up with recalling a whole lot of obligations that at the moment are time
No, I'm not
barred.
asking for that. I'm asking for after 2018, after the end of a fiscal year, any new obligations that come up?
Yes, I mean, we could.
Because are you the one that reports it to the auditor?
We are reporting it to the auditor,
Okay.
so we would be able to do that, just so long as we can report what we've recognized, what we
Correct.
properly recognized.
Yes, that's all I want to know.
Right,
So can we get that on a quarterly basis, a report like that? That just a list of obligations that you are recognizing?
And Senator, you're thinking this would be a separate list?
Correct. Well, I asked you at first if it was included in any other report that you are currently doing. And if not, then yes.
It's not, yes.
All right. Could I just ask you for that? Or do we need a formal provision in law to require it?
Yes, for anything that we've properly recognized we could report that.
All right. So will you do it?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the amendment? Senator Tello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the previous speaker, that's exactly what I was thinking about as well myself. If this audit was done in a yearly, and let's say it finishes October or September 31st, and then something comes up in December, we have to wait a whole year to find out that information in an audit. We get the CRE report quarterly, and I was just thinking, is there any possibility of incorporating that information in the CRER report to provide us any obligations prior year quarterly into the, I know that the previous speaker asked if I called you and asked you for that information, you'll give it to her, but that would be very good to have in this report as well, prior year obligations, because then we can see where the money is being spent, especially when you go to expenditures. We're including now you have to report expenditures. So we can find out where you're spending that money, and if we see that you're spending something on a prior year obligation, then we can actually revert back to, oh, this is an outstanding debt that we still have to pay for. So it can be recognized in the CRE report. Especially now you have to submit the expenditure. So can we actually put that in this requirement to add that part showing the prior year obligations? That is reported yearly in an audit.
Mr. Byrne just committed to doing a quarterly report of extraordinary expenditures that are recognized. A good case for this discussion is, again, the Dave Davis case. I think everybody here knows we lost that case. So you shouldn't be surprised if, a payment is due, because it's all over the media, but he's agreed to provide a quarterly report of extraordinary encumbrances upon the government of Guam.
But there's nothing mandating him to do that, is there?
The previous senator asked whether or not we would do it, and if we needed an amendment, and Mr. Byrne was kind enough to say he would do it.
Lester, for the sake of this, moving forward, I'll take your word for it, but as soon as we don't get that, then I'll put out a bill to make it mandated. Thank you.
Does any other colleague, member would like to speak on the amendment? Are there any objections to the amendment? No objection, motion passes. Now we will move back to page 124. We are on Senator Mary Torres' amendment on section 19. Are there, ma'am, if you'd like to speak to it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, my amendment is to line 13 and 14 of page 124, section 19. What I'm doing here is I'm basically clarifying what I believe is the intent of this section, which is to have any obligations of back wages and benefits owed to compensate employees by judgment or by a settlement agreement action. This CSC is hereby appropriated from FY 2020 budget of the respective agency to which such action is directed. So my amendments are just to cross out the word past and just to clarify that salaries are in reference to back wages and benefits.
Are there any objections to the, anyone would like to speak to this amendment? Senator Tello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like the author to kind of explain exactly what this is. I know we're crossing out past and we're crossing out salaries, but what does this actually change?
Senator Torres, would you yield to the question?
Mr. Chair, I'm just further clarifying what I believe is a little ambiguous by making the amendments, crossing out past obligations of salaries and instead saying any obligations of back wages and benefits. And in conferring with some people in the fiscal team, it is a reasonable amendment just for clarity purposes.
Thank you. Senator Tello? Do you have any further questions on the amendment? None? Are there any Any other members? Are there any objections to this, amendment? There being none, motion passes. Reminder, my colleagues, on page 124, we strike out section 20. We strike out, okay, so if there's any objection, I mean, section 21 is striked out. Okay, we have section 22 is struck out. Section 23 is striked out. We are now on page 126, section 24. Are there any, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I have an amendment authorization on Section 24 to utilize lapsed funds from fiscal year 2019, notwithstanding any other provision of law. Excuse me. Imagahog and Guahan is hereby authorized to recruit and hire public safety personnel for the Guam Police Department and the Department of Corrections using lapsed funds from fiscal year 2019. This is with the understanding that we're supposed to set aside $1.5 million for Guam Police Department and $1 million for DOC for their hiring. Especially Department of Corrections, they are completely understaffed. They need like 100 people, but this is what we're trying to do to right-size it.
Are there any, does any of my colleagues would like to speak to that amendment? Are there any objections to this amendment? None, motion, Senator, no, most,
I just wanted to ask, is this, how much are we expecting to be hired by this?
Here we go again. We'll find the lapses, we'll identify the lapses, and, you know, we'll figure out where we're gonna go. But again, I can't answer how much we're lapsing yet.
She's just authorized. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
thank you. That motion passes. We are now on section 25, on page 126. Do we have any questions for section 25? There are none. We are now on section 26. Do we have any questions? Page 126, section 26. There being none, we are now on page 127. Bereavement leave. All striked out. Or no, sorry. We do have a section. Do we have any questions for none? Section 27. We are at repeal personnel rules and regulation requirements on page 127. Senator Therese.
I just wanted to ask, this looks like it's repealing the mandate to DOA to develop personnel rules and regs that are consistent with that public law that was passed in the 34th Guam Legislature, 34-40.
What's that about?
And I don't have it in front of me, but is that the law to reorganize the government? And now we're repealing their authority to make rules and regs? Can we take a 5-minute recess, Mr. Chair?
Can I just read the title of
Sure,
3440?
yeah.
The title
3440?
of 3440 is
Oh, the
relative-
bereavement, okay.
Yeah, it's
Got it.
bereavement.
Sorry.
It's not personnel rules and regs.
I thought it was for the reorg. Thank you very much.
So we're okay then on that section? Section 27
Oh, good.
is closed. We are now on section 28, rainy day fund. Sir, Senator Clint.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some questions about some of the changes to this section here, particularly in the deposits and appropriations. So my question is, with the deposits and appropriations portion, it's being amended, the current law is being amended to change the threshold of 25% to 10% of the average gross operating requirements funded by the general fund over the prior 3 fiscal years. Could the Department of Administration explain why this is necessary?
I'm sorry, Senator, could you repeat the question?
Sure. Or perhaps OFB could, maybe OFB would be better to explain. What's the purpose of reducing it from 25% to 10%? It's the section in deposits and appropriations that says no deposits to the rainy day fund shall be made if the fund's assets exceed. It used to say 25%, that's struck out, and now it says 10% of the average gross operating requirements funded by the general fund over the prior 3 fiscal years.
I think it's just a matter of the sum of money is very, very large at 25%.
And then it also reduces that 25% threshold to 10% later on in the same section where it says that no expenditures from the rainy day fund shall be made that reduce the rainy day fund below 25%. So instead it's going to change it to no expenditures can be made that reduce the fund below 10%.
10% of the fund expenditures are roughly 600 million a year. So 10% would be 60 million. I don't think it was ever envisaged that the rainy day fund would exceed a number. It's meant to be a rainy day fund. It's not meant to be a large proportion of the annual budget. So I think it's just a question of the sum of money would be more than sufficient to satisfy a rainy day.
We have a question, I guess, in reference to, Madam Speaker?
In reference to the proposed amendment as proffered in this one,
There's no amendment that I'm aware of. There's just a question by
no,
Senator
I understand, so I wanted to talk about Section 22904. I wanted to ask if anyone on the panel can share with me, or to ask OB or legal, who put because this is a new amendment. Over the prior 3 years fiscal year, the exception and expenditures from the rainy shall only be authorized by appropriation or appropriation authorization by Guam Legislature of 2/3 majority vote of its members. Just want to ask how that came into play. Our standing rules say that when a vote is made on voting, there was a court order that says 8, majority.
No, the court order
Majority.
was the majority present.
Majority present.
This is adding the 2/3.
Yeah. The idea, ma'am, was to allow for this to be, first of all, cash funded with a higher threshold of votes from the legislature to appropriate out of it. So instead of 8 votes, it would be 10. So, the idea is that you would fund this, but it would take a very strong consensus of the body to be able to appropriate any money out of it. So like if we
Take
had
a
a
moment.
typhoon or something like that?
Yes, I understand. Can we take a moment's recess? please?
Yes, let's take
Mr. Chair,
a
just
moment
for this-
recess.
Yes.
Get some
Yeah.
clarification,
So for
right?
clarification.
we're back from recess and from legal.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I may?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to legal about this, and based on the interpretation that this requiring a two-third majority of vote of its members may be inorganic based on the recent court case, the judgment on that. So I move to, after the word legislature, move to delete of two-thirds majority vote of its member. No, of two-thirds majority vote of its members, move to delete. And so I can read it on the underline, over the prior 3 years fiscal year, with the exception that expenditures from the rainy day fund shall only be authorized by an appropriation or appropriations authorization by the Guam Legislature. Period.
Are there any objections to that strike as we've received the legal opinion? None? Senator Clint, continue, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the rainy day fund is, the purpose of it, in addition, correct me if I'm mistaken, but part of the purpose of this fund is also to help reduce or be used to pay for, to reduce the deficit. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir. On section 22903.
So was there a deficit in fiscal year 2018?
Yes, Senator, there was.
What was the amount of that deficit?
About 10.4 million.
And so has any of that deficit been paid down yet, or is it being paid down?
It's too early. We haven't closed the books on 2019, so it's too early to determine whether that's been paid down or not.
Is there, knowing that there's a deficit that still remains, in addition to a cumulative deficit that we've accumulated over the fiscal years, do you think it's wise to lower the threshold from 25% to 10% when a higher percentage put into the rainy day fund can be used towards paying down the deficit and cumulative deficits?
I think that a rainy day fund that approximates 10% of the operating expenses is in line with the GFOA requirements. Well, not requirements, recommendations. That's the Government Finance Officers Association has some recommendations, and we've also spoken with rating agencies about this, and I think they would be more than happy if we were able to reach this level.
Okay, so this is sort of a standard that's used in other jurisdictions?
Yes,
the
sir.
10% threshold?
Yes, sir. Well, certainly 25% is not too high. I think the standard is like 10 to 15%. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I do have, Mr. Chair, I have other questions in another, in section 29, which is, that's the next section, is it?
Is the next section.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any question for the rain day fund? Senator Kelly, and then be followed by Senator Therese.
So I'm just clarifying. Right now, we're putting 13.164 million into the rainy day fund. And when I had asked earlier, you said there wasn't any other money in there. So our balance as of passing this at the right point would be $13.164 million in the rainy day fund?
Senator, this is a new fund. There's nothing in it at the moment. This wording allows us to build it up to 13 million over the course of the year.
Right. So when you were speaking here on the section 22904, so this is applicable to this year. So in this year, we're starting with throughout the year, getting up to that 13 million. And you're saying that these percentages come into play when we're talking about when this fund reaches the point of 60 million.
The percentages come in when we built up those kinds of sums of money in the fund, right? But it won't happen this year.
Okay, so that's, yes, I just was making that clear that for this year, especially, we're talking about a difference of 47 million perhaps, so that we're not endangering that threshold is, I guess, my main point. Just to make that clear, that we're not endangering anything. It's very good to be aware of these sort of things, so I commend and appreciate the former senator for asking these questions, because we want to look at something like a reduction from 25% to 10% very seriously, but I just also wanted to emphasize the point that at this point for this year, nothing's in danger
No,
or at risk.
That's correct. Although it's obviously helpful when we're talking to rating agencies and others who look at our financials to have some kind of framework that they know we're operating within.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Therese, question for Section 28.
28, yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a brand-new rainy day fund that it says we're supposed to deposit the money from the next section. So the next section of the bill tells us what we're going to deposit into this rainy day fund. It's supposed to be 2% of the total revenues projected for the general fund. And then it gets put into this rainy day fund, and then it says expenditures shall not exceed, shall not reduce the fund below a certain amount, right? That's the goal of this. No expenditures shall be made that reduce the rainy fund below 10% average of the gross operating requirements. But is that expenditure supposed to be made by the Guam Legislature appropriation, or it says with the exception that expenditures from the rainy day fund shall only be authorized by the legislature? Is it all right if we just delete all that language and say it's going to be not an exception, but that the expenditures from the rainy day fund shall only be authorized by appropriation? Or do you intend to pay deficit off during the year? Or can you give us a schedule of that and we appropriate, something like that?
No, the purpose, Senator, is not to pay off the deficit.
Oh.
The fact that you've got a fund reduces the deficit, but the real purpose of this section is to build up cash, which could be used should some disaster occur.
All right, then can we just, now that I understand that, Mr. Chair, can I just make a verbal amendment to delete after the prior 3 fiscal years, with the exception that, and just start a new sentence, expenditures. So it will be over the prior 3 fiscal years, period. Expenditures from the rainy day fund shall only be authorized by an appropriation.
So what is the amendment? I'm trying to follow you.
Yes.
Okay, we're on line 15, correct?
Yeah.
So what are you recommending to strike out?
The words "with the exception that."
Okay, with the exception that, that's to be eliminated?
And it should be a period right there. Yeah.
Okay? That's to be eliminated, right?
Correct.
So
Deleted.
with the exception that is eliminated, is your proposal, and that's it?
A capital E.
And that's it? Yeah, yes, capital E. Do we have any objection to that? Okay, I'm gonna repeat it. Her amendment is to, on line 16, page 129, after the word years, on line 16, fiscal years, to strike out with the exception that, those 4 words, that's all she asked for to strike. And the panel from the administration have acknowledged that they don't see any problem with that. Are there any objection to that motion? None? That's eliminated. Do we have any more questions for section 28? We still got to go to 29. Okay, so we're still in 28. Yes, ma'am. Senator Reese.
Okay, no, on 29.
Okay. Now we are at, we've completed section 28. All right? Now we are at section 29. General fund continue appropriate to the rainy day fund. All right, Senator Clint.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment to this section of the Section 29, General Fund Continuing Appropriations to the Rainy Day Fund. Currently, what's required is that, well, basically the bill amends it so that the legislature has to continuously appropriate 2% of total revenues projected for the general fund for each fiscal year to the rainy day fund. My only issue is this restricts us every fiscal year. We should be allowed to change this each budget. We should be allowed to control the purse strings, and I don't think we should be hamstringed in a way in which we have to do this continuously every single fiscal year. And I think it goes in line with not preventing other future legislatures from doing their job as far as appropriating is concerned. So I have an amendment that I've passed out that will basically revert back to the original language. And what that amendment does is it strikes out, and the amendment should have been passed out by now. What it does is it strikes out the word continuing under section 22436, general fund. Continuing is struck out, appropriations to the rainy day fund, and then it restores the section that's struck out in the budget bill. That's A, it says beginning in fiscal year 2010, the legislature shall not appropriate more than 98% of the total revenues projected for the general fund for the fiscal year until such time as the general fund deficit is eliminated. All unappropriated annual general fund revenues collected in excess appropriations shall be used to liquidate obligations for refunds, earned income tax credits, and prior year's vendor payables. And then on the next paragraph, it says the legislature shall, strikes out again the word continuously, appropriate not less than 2% of total revenues projected for the general fund for each fiscal year to the rainy day fund established pursuant to section 22901, article 9, division 2, chapter 22, title 5 of the Guam Code, annotated until such time as indicated in section 22904, article 9, division 2, chapter 22, title 5 of the Guam Code, annotated. And then it also restores the section that, it restores B, that's struck out in the budget bill that says emergency to the extent necessary to deal with any disaster or emergency. This general fund appropriations cap may be temporarily lifted in the event Imagalahi, the governor, the president of the United States, or Legislature, the legislature, by vote of a majority of its members, declares Guam to be in a state of emergency or any similar designation. So basically, it just reverts back to the original language in this section.
Thank you, Senator Joe. Just to advise the colleague, I've spoken to the panel up here. They have no objection to it. So does anyone want to speak to this amendment? Senator Therese, you have a comment for this amendment?
Just does putting the original emergency language back in there then kind of delete what we were just doing back in the rainy day fund? Oh, no, it just talks about the cap. Okay, so that's all right. I did have a question, but never mind. I think after the amendment, I can ask that.
Okay, so for this amendment, are there any questions? Senator Kelly, ma'am?
Seduis Masi, I was just wondering, what was the intention for adding in the word continuing? What was hoped to be achieved? We have here language each fiscal year, so I'm just trying to figure out why continuing was added in and what the importance is of it being taken out. So I guess for OFB or whoever it was that came up with the language, what they felt was going to be achieved by adding in the language continuing.
So this year would be 13 million, a rough estimate of 10% of the general fund operating requirements, just say 600 million. So 10% would be 60 million. So it would be continuously appropriated until we hit 60. And to Senator Ragel's question about the 25%, that would actually be 150 million. Okay? So the continuously appropriating allows for the rainy day fund to build up absent any emergencies or natural disasters where the monies would then be available for disbursement. So that was the rationale.
So is it your understanding then, since we're keeping in the language about the 10% in the hopes that perhaps someday we will get up to having a rainy day fund of $60 million or more, does taking out continuing conflict then with the fact that we do have that language in deposits and appropriations?
I think Senator Ragel's comment was actually very appropriate because an action of one legislature should not be binding a future legislature. The only exception to that is debt service, where once we enter into a multi-year repayment of a debt, those amounts need to be taken off the top, which we do every year. So I have no problem with his preserving the authority of the legislature.
Sejus Masi, for the clarification, I just wanted to make sure that they were not in conflict with one another since the language is still there in 22904.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Are there any Senator Tello, on the amendment?
Actually, Mr. Chair, my question is not on the amendment. I'll just wait after the amendment goes through and then I'll
all
ask
right.
that question.
Do we have any member would like to speak on the amendment? Yes, Senator Juice.
I just asked the author if he would yield or anyone. If we deleted section B, where we restored the deletion of subsection B, the emergency, and then just left that in place, I guess, until the legislature comes in to remove it or something? Or do you think you need to keep that in there? Because you were proposing to delete it, and then we were going to be governed by this rainy day fund, mandate of when you didn't need to deposit money. But this one says, and any declaration of emergency. But it's really kind of general, so I just, we have declarations of emergencies for different things and might not all be necessary to do this.
This fiscal year might be a good example. There is no 2% deficit reduction due to the fact that we have the tremendous burden of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So every year prior to this year, the legislature only appropriated 98% of revenues, except for this fiscal year. So this would be preserve, again, your ability to not do something given a hardship such that we incurred in this fiscal year, to be able to then fund all the necessary government operations.
But what about the deposits? Because it says, okay, maybe it won't affect the deposits. So the deposits are not affected by the emergency, only the amount of appropriations can be, the legislature can say we will appropriate less. We will not appropriate that 2%.
That would be your
from the
prerogative.
section. Yeah, I see. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any objections to this amendment? No objection. Amendment passes. Now are we still on section 29? I see Senator Tello's hand. Ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a couple questions for DOA with regards to the rainy day fund, and what do you estimate to be that it's going to generate into this account?
As in the revenue section of the bill, it's something over 13 million.
13 million? Okay. Is this going to create a new bank account? Are you going to have to, since, this was not, the rainy day fund was not in FY19 budget. It was in the FY18 budget, though. So my question is there an account already existing for this rainy day fund this time around? And, yeah, so let's answer that question first.
I think I heard you ask, does it require a new bank account? And the answer is yes.
Okay. And how do you procure for that account, where the money is going to be placed?
We would open a bank account where we currently have bank accounts.
So there's no procurement on that, or going out for bid or anything like that?
Not to open a new bank account, no.
Okay, thank you.
The procurement of banking services, which covers the bank accounts and other services, was done by my predecessor and is not due until, I think, the end of next year.
The end of
it's a three-year procurement.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Ms. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Byrne.
Are there any other questions for Section 29? Senator, no questions? Do you have a question, Senator Therese, on Section 29? Okay. Not much?
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we all have the same understanding. So this section in prior law that's been in law for several years, saying that the legislature can only appropriate up to 98% of the total revenues projected for the general fund. It also says the revenues collected in excess of that shall be used to liquidate obligations for refunds, earned income tax credits, and prior year's vendor payables. That's just an intent. It doesn't really mandate it there. But when we put it into the rainy day fund, it really just says eliminating or reducing general fund deficit existing at the end of a fiscal year. But do you consider these things to be our deficit, or are we talking of? What are we intending? Do you see a difference, or because also the deficit is the existing obligations of loans and all the bonds? No?
Where's your deficit calculation, the 83? Yeah, I think she wants to know what.
It says the purpose of the rainy day fund is to eliminate or reduce any general fund deficit existing at the end of a fiscal year substantially resulting from an unexpected substantial decline in revenues. So we're putting this money aside for that purpose, right? And so I just want to know if that's the same purpose as what we were supposed to be doing with that 2%. This is tax refunds, earned income tax credits, and prior year payables.
Yeah, you're correct.
Same.
We're not doing anything other than that.
Okay, so you interpret those the same.
Yes.
All right, and then, Mr. Chair, can I just ask a question on the previous section? So it says we're going to put some of that money into an investment and that you can take the interest and also that can be deposited into the rainy day fund. I'm on 22906. But that also says that if it also puts that provided that if the fund exceeds, then what it's saying is that the interest on this rainy day fund, if it exceeds a certain amount, can be put back into the general fund and used for other purposes. Should we just keep that interest in there and build that fund up?
I think that the intention of that paragraph, Senator, was simply to maintain that cap on the rainy day fund, and if the investment earnings cause that cap to be exceeded, that would just spill over into the general fund. But that would be nice to happen, but interest rates are really low at the moment, so I can't anticipate that happening.
Yeah. So, Senator, if it was the $60 million was the cap, and we had some investment earnings that brought it over to 61, then the $1 million would go into the general fund for appropriation. If you were to strike that, then it would stay in the rainy day fund. But we would have already achieved our 10% goal, and the idea was to allow anything in excess of that 10% goal to be available for appropriation.
All right. And how would we know it's available for appropriation?
We report fund balances every year.
Okay. So the fund balance, that we would calculate that. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to the panel.
Thank you. We have now completed, my colleagues, it's 11:15 now. We still have approximately 14 more pages to go, and we still have quite a few amendments. We recess or no? Right. I'm just looking at the clock. We have, and like I mentioned, we have about 14, 15 pages left. And if we'll go to 12. Okay. Yes, we'll get to you, Madam Speaker. You remember I told you, when we get to page 31, you'll be first. So we're now, okay, so we'll just continue until 12. We are now on page 131. But let's take a quick recess. My colleagues, we are back from recess. There is a request by one of our members to go back to page 130, an amendment that the panel is not in objection to. Do we have an objection to go back one page? There being none, Senator Therese Sarlai, your amendment?
Thank you very much, and I appreciate it. Thank you to my colleagues. This amendment will simply remove, on the section where the rainy day funds may be invested, all investments, income from proceeds and all proceeds and income from investments of the rainy day fund shall be deposited in the rainy day fund. And I want to put a period there and delete the rest of the sentence that says unless, we have certain amounts. I just want to put all the amounts in there. And then we can deal with it while it's in that fund. I think it's going to be easier to track. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you, Senator Therese. The panel has no objection to that. Are there any objection by the members? There being none, motion passes. We are now on page 131. Madam Speaker.
Mr. Chair, I did pass out an amendment to this provision, to this section, and I wanted to add a new section 31.
A new section 31 on page 131.
Yes. And
Okay,
it was
so-
passed out earlier, and it,
Okay, because you're adding a section. Do we have, does it reflect anything to do with section 30?
no, sir.
No. Okay, so can we at least close section 30 and then we'll back to you?
Yes, sir.
Is there any question for section 30?
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So,
Section 30.
We did speak with Director Shibazu. There are some issues regarding releasing W-2 forms. So I have an amendment. It's printing up right now with the clerks. And I would like to add something to that. It's actually, it was sent to the clerks. It's
Okay,
being
but so
printed
it's being printed. So
Yes.
we'll bookmark that part. Anybody else on section 30? Senator Clint Rogel, do you have your amendment out also?
Yes, I do. This is an amendment I attempted to proffer earlier in the Budget Act, in the Budget Bill, and I believe this is the appropriate section to place this amendment. And this is, so it would be on line 18 of page 131. It's adding a new section.
Senator, if it's to add a new section, then it's not section 30, or it's in addition to section 30?
Well, I guess it would be on the same page. That's why I wanted to make sure we didn't
Okay,
pass this
only
page.
because Madam Speaker was ready to introduce one. We're only asking about section 30, and we're going to bookmark that for Senator Paris. Madam Vice, it's okay. So we'll go to the Speaker first, and then we can proceed to you, and then the Vice Speaker. Okay? Right.
Mr. Chair, we are done with section 30.
No, it's bookmarked because we're waiting for the printout of the information from the Department of Revenue Tax. So
I
we'll
can-
proceed to your amendment.
Thank you,
I'm
Mr.
just-
Chair.
Does everybody have a copy of your amendment first before we?
Yes, sir.
Because I'm looking for
It
it
was
right now.
passed out a
know.
while, several days ago.
Yes, and that's what. Tom, can you make sure that, have somebody hold on to her amendment? And just walk around real quick to make sure everybody's got one, because I'm looking for it right now. I will make sure that we're.
You have it?
Sobla amendment.
Clerk? No, yeah. That's the restrictions of hiring of unclassified employees. Yeah, with my initials? Yeah.
I have one. Does everyone have one?
They should.
It's to amend
Three.
the bill to add a section 31. Because that becomes the last section in it for now, until others add amendments. It'll be to add a new section. Section 31. Okay, are we? She's going to read her amendment.
So, Mr. Chair, if
Yes,
I may,
Madam
just
Speaker.
cross out line 13 and just It is a new section 131, and it specifically says restrictions on hiring of unclassified employees unless authorized by this chapter. No government funds of any kind or description may be expended for the employment of hiring of unclassified employees in the executive branch of the government of Guam, except for the following. A, certified persons of the Guam Department of Education as identified in Section 7151, Chapter 7, Title 1 GCC. Any academic teaching positions at the University of Guam and the Guam Community College. C, nurses, doctors, licensed professionals, and auxiliary health employees necessary for clinical purposes at the Department of Public Health and Social Services, the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, the Guam Memorial Hospital, the Guam Police Department, and the Department of Integrated Services for Individuals with Disabilities. D, Department of Labor Survey Workers. E, Systems and Programming Administrator, Junior Systems Programmer, Senior Programmer Analyst, Junior Application Analyst, Junior Programmer Analyst, and Junior Application Programmer, and positions dealing with reporting tax audits, tax investigations, tax collections, and processing of taxes at the Department of Revenue and Taxation. F, federally funded positions matching and up to 100%. G, persons filling temporary vacancies created by the call to active military duty of employees who are members of the reserve components of the Department of Defense and the Department of Transportation, including but not limited to the United States Army, United States Navy, United States Marine Corps, United States Air Force, the Guam National Guard, the Guam Army National Guard, the Guam Air National Guard, and the United States Coast Guard, or created by absence due to a long-term disability status which has been certified by a medical doctor. Departments may exercise this hiring authority provided its authorized budget for personnel is not exceeded. H, positions within the Office of Magahaga Guahan, the Office of Segundo na Magalayan Guahan, and the Guam State Clearinghouse, and the department or agency's heads and private secretaries, positions within the Mayor's Council of Guam, positions within the Guam Election Commission, limited term, part-time substitute teachers of the Guam Department of Education. 1, all persons employed pursuant to this section effective 1 October 2019 shall meet the minimum knowledge, abilities, and skills KAS associated with such position. M, professional engineers required to fill chief engineer positions. N, positions within the business office of the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, which shall consist of certified coders and billers. O, victim advocates within the office of the Attorney General. P, the executive director and staff positions of the Comisión y Fino Chamorros and Fina Gwen Estudios and Nilatla Tautano, the Commission of Chamorro Language and Teaching of the History and Culture of Indigenous People of Guam. Q, Child Protective Social Workers at the Department of Public Health and Social Services. R, Labor Law Enforcement Specialists. And S, Census Enumerators. And Mr. Chair, if I may, this was, I would assume, was inadvertently taken out. It was in last year's provisions with some added-ons, and I just want to say that it's giving the authority to pick up for these needed positions.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. But I just wanted to make sure that only one correction. You said after letter K, you said 1. I think the intent was to say letter L because following is M.
Wait,
in
I'm sorry.
alphabetical order. You said 1.
H-I-J-K-L-M.
Yeah, okay, because you said 1 and it's supposed to be L.
I'm sorry, L.
Right, okay, I just wanted to make sure that was clear. I know that was,
And it's Magahagan.
yes, it's, we're okay. Are there anyone would like to speak to the amendment? Madam Vice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, excuse me. The subsection A here, certified persons at the Guam Department of Education, as identified in subsection 715.1, Chapter 7, Title 1 GCA. And so I pulled that up, and that's the, excuse me, that's the 14 points. Just a question, if it says certified person, does that exclude like hiring substitutes and so forth and so on? Should we identify certified and non-certified personnel? Because not all teachers are certified teachers. They're emergency certified, but they haven't taken the praxis and stuff. So I'm just wondering the impact.
No, Madam Speaker, if you can at least comment that you have no objection to.
Or maybe I can ask legal
If the-
just to see the impact. I don't have an issue with the amendment, I just want to make sure it's right, because we just
I am-
received other employees that were essentially not completely certified.
Yes, you're right. And to include like substitute teachers, they're not certified, but they meet their criteria at the Department of Revenue and Tax. I mean,
I have
Department
no
of Education.
problem to the objection, Mr. Chair.
Point of information, and maybe I'm misreading or misunderstanding. Is that K or
Which one? K?
K, limited term part-time substitute teachers, or is there something in addition to that the question is addressing?
Oh, okay, that's on letter K. I think that was the question she was asking. It's further down on the list. Madam Vice, the question you asked is also listed as authorized on letter K when we talk about the limited term part-time substitute teacher department. So it gave them that window there for them.
Right, but then you also have your one-to-one aides and so forth and so on that are not. Let me just get clarification from legal.
Yes,
Mr. Chair.
please. Senator Therese Terlai, you wanted to make comment to the amendment?
Yes, I support this amendment, Mr. Chair. It will continue to authorize this type of hiring of unclassified for these types of positions. But I would just like, I note that subletter S, census enumerators, is new this year, but I see the need for that. And, but I would also like, I had passed out another amendment to add subsection T, senior law clerks. So if I could make a motion to amend the amendment to add T, senior law clerks. Senior law clerks.
So what letter is that?
Serious? I mean,
So
a new
T?
T,
under T,
a new T, to add a new T.
okay, to add a T,
Correct.
senior law clerk.
Yeah, this is at the request of the Attorney General.
Are there any objection to that? No objection? Okay, that's added. We also have, my colleagues, the panel have expressed that they would like to comment, and I think, Senator Teresa, if you could add that, please.
CFO. Yes, I'd like to also make an amendment to add a new U, which is a certified financial officer. No, chief financial officer, chief financial officers.
Okay. Are there any objection to that add-on? There being none? Yes, ma'am.
No, there was just a point of inquiry, Mr. Chair. The chief financial officer, is this for a specific agency, or is this just a general?
The problem they're having right now, as it's a classified position, nobody's applying for it at DOA. They're trying to get somebody to work on their books in addition to Mr. Byrne has been doing it himself with his staff. And they're trying to get the authorization to be able to hire a non-classified so they can get this going.
Okay, thank
Because
you,
these
Mr.
are the
Chair.
reports we've been asking for, and we're going to need help.
No objection,
Okay?
Mr.
No
Chair.
objection? So any other, okay, well, it'll say CFO at DOA, right? That was the intent. And there's no objection.
No objection.
Thank you. Is there any objection to, any more comments to this amendment? Yes,
No.
Madam Vice.
Mr. Chair, I'm just getting more clarification on this section.
Okay, if you
With
want,
legal
if there's no other question, we can bookmark this section
It
and
was
then
in
move
the
on to the
previous
next.
law, that's-
Unless there's other questions.
Then take, yeah.
If there are no other questions, we'll
Mr.
still
Ch-
bookmark
Yeah.
this page, and we can move on to the other
Yes,
sections.
and if I may, Mr. Chair, just based on the good Vice Speaker's inquiry on sub-item A, if I can check with OFB and legal counsel in reference to the Department of Education certified persons, based on the 14 points, I may need to move for further clarification and deletion, so if you can just have that bookmark
Yes.
also.
My colleagues, it is 13 to 12. Why don't we go ahead and recess until 1:30, and then return, and then we'll finish off on this and continue on. I know there's still other amendments. Senator Therese has an amendment on page 131, so and Senator Lee, we'll have a lot. So why don't we recess till 1:30?